No, not that corner, the other corner. No, not that corner, the other corner. Have you found it yet, Dave? Have you found it? Have you found it? I keep telling you, look at the other corner.
Found it.
Ah. Good morning and welcome everybody to Talking Niagara this morning as Dave finds his phone.
I might as well just go to the farthest place in the house every time I lose it, because that seems to be where it is. I might as well start at the farthest place, then I'll find it.
Yeah.
Rather than start here and move to the farthest place.
But start half an hour early, all right? And put it on the table when you find it. Good morning, Mike Cushman. Good morning. So, okay, so welcome once again. Some interesting stories cropped up. So, yeah.
We got one from last week still.
Pardon me?
We got one there from last week still.
Yeah. Okay. So UK sent refugees from Diego Garcia to Rwanda. And those refugees in Rwanda are not faring very well. All right. They feel isolated and unsafe. And particularly, I would imagine, completely out of their kind of what they would expect. They've got complex medical needs and resulting from past rape and torture. And they're basically saying this isn't being met in the refugee camp in Rwanda. And the worst of it is they can't work and get money.
Well, a little background here. The UK, of course, like other European powers, but the UK particularly is pressed by the amount of immigration, even though the English Channel is there. Refugees. So even though the English Channel is there, they seem to still be able to get across, thousands of them, and it's very, very difficult for the British government to deal with.
These are refugees. These are refugees that fled Sri Lanka, went to Diego Garcia, and now they were turned by the British authorities in Diego Garcia to Rwanda.
All right, continue with the backstory. So the British government has tried to find another place for people to come. Now, the Diego Garcia part of this is significant because in this particular case, when they're talking about these particular people, because Diego Garcia is what is called a British international overseas territory, and that is a group of small islands in between, kind of like in between, right in the middle of the Indian Ocean, basically. Yeah. But the Sri Lankans can get there, and so they go there, and then they try to claim refugee status. But because it's a British independent overseas territory, anybody that's there don't have the same rights as if they got into a British territory, basically, because this is administrative territory, not part of Britain, basically.
Yeah.
So that's the legal hitch. The other thing is that also on Diego Garcia, they have huge military, the U.S. and the U.K., because of the strategic location, have huge military bases, as far as I can see. Now, the reason why are the Brits sending the refugees to Rwanda? This is a thing that's being tried for a couple of years now. It's finally been approved, where the refugees that are coming into Britain will then be shipped to Rwanda. This obviously is a deterrent. When you know that if you come to Britain as a refugee, you might end up in Rwanda. You might not want to keep coming into Britain. Now, what should be happening is the refugees should be staying in Europe in the first places which they come into, but that's not happening. And and for some reason, so many of them want to be in Britain more than they want to be in France or Spain or other places. Probably because Britain has quite a mix of different nationalities, and they probably won't stand out as much.
Well, and many of these come from former British colonies anyway. So, and English is a language they already understand, whereas French maybe
even those that have no connection with Britain previously seem still to want to go to Britain. Britain seems to be the preferred location of any refugees.
The streets in London are paved with gold, Dave.
Well, I don't know what it is about Britain that attracts so many. I don't know if they think it's an easier stepping stone to the US or wherever else. I'm not so sure. But Britain is the most popular place for refugees. That's where most of them want to go, if they can get there. But let's be fair first before we even continue with this story. This refugee thing is going on all over the world.
It is. It is.
I was in Costa Rica in April there for a nice. Well, I was there for 12 days, but 2 of them were travel days. For 10 days, I was there in 2 different locations in Costa Rica, and I quickly found out that there is almost as many Nicaraguans in Costa Rica as there are Costa Ricans. And that is because Nicaragua's economy is not nearly as good as Nicaraguans. The Nicaraguans are very related type people. They'd be very, very similar, but they cross the border all the time. They're illegals. And they do the same thing with them there as they do here or in the States. When they get illegals, they bring them in and they use them for labor. And that's what's happening. But that's a country like Costa Rica who is suffering from undue refugees from the country beside it, and that's not a first world country. Costa Rica it's a very well developed democracy. It's doing very well, but it's still a poor and much smaller country. It's happening in Chile. Chile is all of a sudden there's all kinds of different people in Chile, and the crime rate's gone all up because people come there. And you don't get an instant life, right? So a lot of people turn to crime. So this is a thing that's happening not just in the first level countries. It's happening in the developing world. It's where poor nations are moving. So Britain itself, it happens to be one of the places that a lot of people like to go to. They think, like you said, London's, the paved with gold. If you can get past the old coal soot, maybe you could find some gold down there. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, actually, there is one thing that I note about this article when I was looking through it. So each of these refugees in Rwanda receive about £39 or $50 a week for food and other essentials, and this is paid in part by UK and part by Rwandan governments. Now, you think about what a refugee is going to cost on the streets of London. I'm not saying they're going to earn thousands, but it's going to be a heck of a lot more than $50 a week.
Look what it costs them right here in town. It costs us many thousands of dollars every week. Many thousands of dollars every week. Well, it costs hundreds of dollars every week for every refugee that's in this town.
Yeah.
The asylum seekers, we call them, but they're just refugees basically. It costs us thousands of dollars daily for them. So you can imagine what it would be like in London, the same thing. And that's right off on the taxpayer. Yeah. And so the whole idea of the refugee ideology was to take in displaced people, and it was based around what happened after the Second World War, when you had massive devastation all over the place and people running from armies basically and trying to get out of the way of violence. In this particular case, it's completely different. There is a lot of political refugees, that's true, but almost all of them are economic refugees. Now, these people here in this particular story, now if anyone doesn't know, Rwanda is in Africa. Rwanda is where that genocide happened between the Hutus and the Tutsis back in the 90s.
It's not exactly the first place you'd think about putting refugees, is it?
Well, obviously, it's a deterrent effect. Britain wanted a place to put people, to store them, basically. In Australia, when the refugees try to get into Australia, they put them in, what's that island there? Papua New Guinea, right? They keep them there. Port Moresby, I think. I'm not sure. But somewhere around there. They have an arrangement with Papua New Guinea or one of those close islands. So if you're a refugee and you come to Australia, they don't want you a refugee. They'll take you in as an immigrant, but you have to apply. But if you're a refugee, bump, you go to that island. Because you can imagine if they started accepting refugees in Australia, how many people would come there? They get one of the most populous countries in Indonesia, right very close there. If their borders were suddenly open, we imagine the flood of people that would come in, like it would be unending. So they made it very clear very early on, you come here, you're going to get stuck in Port Moresby, and that's it. You're going to, or wherever they put them, and that's it. You ain't you're not putting your feet on the soil here in Australia. You can do your immigration, all your paperwork there, and we'll accept you or not accept you. And I think that's what Britain has done too. This has been a very and I don't doubt that the U.S. will maybe come up with something like this too. Remember, when Trump was in, he kept all the refugees in Mexico. That was his rule. He kept them in Mexico, and then they could apply for asylum there in Mexico, not inside the United States. Well, that seems to be contrary to the law, but and the Democrats fought that. But now the Democrats are in a situation where they have a flood going across the border, and they don't know what to do with it. So, like Trump's solution may have been a harsher one, but it certainly saved a lot of people from coming over the border. And this is going to be something that's going to continue more and more. And I don't think that what Britain has done here is it's threatened its asylum seekers with a nice home in Rwanda. And so I think it may be a deterrent. I'm not so sure, though. In the long run, the amount of people that are moving away from war zones, or even just to get an opportunity, will go. Like when I was in Ghana, the people there were fairly well educated. They were good workers and all that other stuff. But they had very little opportunity. The average person they could work for pennies, but they had very little opportunity to move up. That's one of the things that drive people here.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And basically, all of these ones that were in Rwanda, that were sent to Rwanda, have been Sri Lankan Tamils transferred from what was it, Diego Garcia in this, as you said, a military camp essentially in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and now there's basically hundreds of them being sent for urgent medical care after suicide attempts, and they're now out of military hospital and living in two flats on, they're living outside, this capital of Kigali, paid for by British authorities, but they're not in Britain. And I guess that's the key factor here.
Yeah, that's the key factor, and they are being taken care of the Rwanda medical system, but the Rwanda, but then you get odd things like this. The Rwanda medical staff have shouted at him. This is the person prior talking. I forget his name. As Hagu, a 23-year-old guy. He says Rwanda medical staff have shouted at him, he alleges, on one occasion after self-harming. He says he was threatened with arrest and told to return to Diego Garcia. Well, you're not going to get much sympathy from an overburdened doctor when you self-harm yourself. You know what I mean? If you self-harm yourself, you are making yourself a medical emergency when there are real ones out there where people, I'm not saying that when you self-harm, it's not a real medical emergency. It's more of a psychological thing, but then you get in the way with your self-harming. If you keep self-harming yourself, it's going to be taken as a strategy you're doing to get better medical attention, meaning get to the UK.
Yeah. Well, and actually the point being is that that doesn't seem to be on the cards.
Well, it says here that the lawyer Tom Short from the UK firm Lee Day says the independent expert assessment found each of our clients have complex medical needs which are not being met in Rwanda. That means they want to get into the UK. Is it a strategy? Some would have a complex medical, but I think a lot of it's put on because that would then become your strategy. I have all these, and well, how can you tell liars from the truth tellers?
It's easy to be cynical that people adapt their methods of trying to get to new countries.
Well, yeah, when you're desperate, you're going to do that. Yeah, look at the stories that are on this. Good morning, Angela. Look at what's happening in the stories of anybody that comes even into Canada, a refugee claimants. For a while there, like they lose all the papers. How about that? They're all gone. No, they don't have any paperwork anymore. They don't know where they're from. They all have the same one. There's like 4 or 5 different stories in the southern border of the U.S. They were coached by the coyotes what to say. So they would find that these people had no paperwork, none at all. So you had masses of people without even a birth certificate or a license or anything, no passports, and they all share the same stories. Like they have 4 or 5 different stories and they're almost exactly the same. They get a little more sophisticated now, but if somebody notices that someone with complex medical needs gets better attention, well, guess what? I got complex medical needs too. I've got the mystery disease that I need to go to UK to find out about. Anything. You would do anything because the amount of effort you've put in so far, you're not going to be stopped by some. You're gonna put it on if you can. How many? I would if I had gone from Sri Lanka, gone across that open Indian Ocean, and got to Diego Garcia, and this boat that some of them were in, they were trying to get to Canada. That's what they say. They went into a boat and tried to get to Canada, but they made it as far as Diego Garcia, and then they go to Rwanda. Wouldn't you do anything possible to get out of Rwanda and try to get to the UK or some other?
And the thing
European
is, when you think about how far south Rwanda is, Rwanda's right in Central Africa, so it's probably 1,000. It's probably more than 1,000 kilometers to the ocean in any direction, right? Southern Central Africa, a very difficult place to get out of, and a couple of 1,000 kilometers from Europe at least.
Yeah, well, talk about migration. The article left over from last week is of a different kind of migration, and it's about Canadians heading south into the United States. The numbers have gone way up. Last year there was 126,000 Canadians or more. I think over 100,000 Canadians heading south to live in the United States, and there's a steady stream of Canadians going that way. What do you think about that? Is another sort of migration. This time it's affluent people moving to a place where they could become more affluent with the money they have. In some cases, people go ahead.
There's always been, there's always been a certain amount of brain drain.
Well, this is different. This is different. In fact, a lot of these are older people who are already well established. And there's a 70% increase compared to 10 years ago. So, yeah, you're right. There's always been a brain drain. As a matter of fact, my son lived down there for about 6 years because he was a computer programmer. Yeah. And I told him to come back when the Seattle riots were nutty, and I wanted him back here. He makes very good money, but not like he made in Seattle. There's nothing about Canadians moving south of the 49th. It says right here, there's nothing new about Canadians moving south of the 49th parallel for love, work, warmer temperatures. From the American Community Survey suggests that now happening is a much higher rate at a historical rate. So there's 126,340 in 2022. And that's an increase of nearly 75,000 since 2010. And that trend continues. The reason why that is, if you have money, if you have a certain amount of money or just enough money, it's kind of different. If you have a fair amount of money and you go down there, a person with money could do better down there because everything's cheaper. There's less social safety nets, but if you in any bracket, you don't need that. But for instance, one of the most popular places to go, of course, is Florida. There's thousands and thousands of Canadians in Florida, and basically things are cheaper there. The weather's better, of course, except in hurricane seasons, and everything's cheaper. The problem, of course, is medical. That can be a hitch. But other than that, the other reason is if you're a person that lives up here and you want a house, you can't afford a house. You can still afford a house.
The thing is, for example, if your kids are working up here, you could live in Florida, and if you need medical attention, you're living at your kid's address, for example. Your OHIP form is all valid and up date, and you just basically come back here, get your medical attention, and go back.
Well, that you have to live in Ontario for a certain amount of time, and we're not talking about people like that. We're not talking about snowbirds. We are talking about people who are leaving here and setting up residencies.
I know, but that's always possible. You can have people who leave there, keep, they're registered at a member of the family's address in Ontario to keep those cards alive.
That would be hard to do because once you cross the border, it's all on a computer. They know where you are anyway. They know you've crossed the border and haven't crossed back in. So that's probably what the Ontario government would use. The Ontario government requires you to be here, live in Ontario. I think it's almost like 200 days of the year or something like that. I'm not quite sure. In any case, if you're going to maintain your residency, just as an aside, when I was in Vietnam, Australia's got public medical insurance. So what's happening there is a lot of Aussies are living in Thailand or Vietnam or Cambodia because it's a lot cheaper to live there, but they have a relative at home and they need to stay in Australia for a certain amount of time to keep their residency status so they can use their medical system. So that's what they do. So they have family members where they can stay with for part of the year to maintain their residency status in Australia and then move back to Thailand or Vietnam where it's a lot cheaper to live. And actually, when I was in Vietnam, I wouldn't want in Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon. It would be a nice place to live actually, because things are cheap. I won't go into some of the things, but anyway, but let's get back to ours. Here is we are leaving Canada, And the reasons we are leaving is, well, number one, if you've got money, it goes farther in the States. However, and if you, so you're more likely to be able to buy a house or all those different things that you can't buy here. The other part of it is those people who have a fair amount of income, but find that they are just on the edge of not being of where they were. Their standard of living has gone down. And one of the examples in this article is somebody, I think, from Woodstock, who's leaving Woodstock area and moving there because they can't afford things as well as they could before. So they're going to box their stuff up, leave, get the money for their house, sell their house here, go down there, and be able to increase their standard of living. Now, the big drawback, of course, is the medical.
Well, actually, when increasing their standard of living, actually, that's an interesting thing in itself, because when you consider what rents are like here in Southern Ontario, what house costs are like here in Southern Ontario, there are places you can go. You could go in the United States, sell your Toronto house and buy 10 such houses in certain cities in the US.
Yeah, they've had a housing crisis, but nowhere near the ones that we have had. It's funny that Florida is still affordable, but they got a lot of trailer parks down there where it's a little cheaper to live. Condos and all that other stuff, those are very expensive now. And the reason why people are dodgy about buying condos down in Florida right now is because some of them have fallen apart, and the insurance rates have to go way up because of the hurricane increase in hurricanes. So the insurance, that it is a real problem if the insurance company says you got to pay more because we know there's more hurricanes coming.
Well, actually, our neighbor actually lost their trailer in the trailer park down in there because a hurricane came through. Well, it was insured, but they basically made the decision that maybe going to Florida every year wasn't a good thing anymore.
Well, the other alternative for people like that is just to pack things up here and move there.
Yeah.
Now, this kind of movement, like we normally talk about movement of very poor people, refugees, and people seeking asylum and that kind of thing. But there is this movement of wealthier, more well-to-do people into other parts of North America or other parts of.
Well, I was going to say the country
in Europe or other parts of North America, and like the big one is California. People moving to Texas. People of
so the biggest numbers you'd expect would be going to the US, right? Always would be biggest. And the most popular here individually, you got US, UK, Australia, France, Italy, and all of those are logical because we know many people around here that all have their, they all have their family that come from those countries. And then you've got 269,000 people, who've emigrated since 2020, have gone to other countries, not those.
Well, a popular thing to do. I remember reading about a Canadian guy who made a bunch of money here and then went back to Pakistan. He's a Pakistani. Went back to Pakistan and he had a lot of money to buy the kind of compound that he wanted to live in. But what he found is nobody came to visit him. He thought once he was back home, so to speak, after living in Canada for so long and making a good pile of money, so he had a nice place in Pakistan, which he could afford, obviously, that nobody came to visit him. So it really wasn't worth the effort. That's what he thought. He thought people would come to visit him there, but it didn't happen. There, of course, everybody's busy with their own life in Canada. And
well, I was going to say, not many people who are living in Canada would want to go to Pakistan. and probably many of the relatives who who from Pakistan that were left in Pakistan would probably be going, well, we're no longer in contact with them.
Yeah, it's a cultural divide. Like he longed for his old culture. He had a romantic idea
of no longer part of his old culture. That's the thing. He probably, when he returned to Pakistan, he bought $1 million home when his family came from the slums.
I don't know where his family came from or anything.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I'm just projecting here, right?
Yeah, but what I was talking about earlier is we talk about the asylum seekers and refugees moving in and all around the world. Well, and we find that it's not just here. It's like places from Nicaragua going to Costa Rica, anywhere where the life is a little bit better. A lot of the asylum seekers who can't make it through the Panama Central America corridor end up staying in South America and moving into places like more prosperous countries like Chile and Peru and that, and it's making a problem for those countries. But this other shift of well-to-do people in North America moving to other places in North America is kind of an interesting demographic too. So you have places like Texas and Florida that have much less taxes. So people who have wherewithal, who are more taxed than others, will move to places like Florida and Texas because they can get a lot better break on their money goes a lot farther. And of course, well, the weather for one thing, but it's also financial. It's money. I've known lots of guys head down to Florida and they live the life of Riley for a while until they get a heart attack or something. Yeah. And all of a sudden they owe $100,000 for medical bills, and then they have to come back to Canada, because they can't live down there anymore. They're trying to dodge their medical bills.
Yeah,
$100,000. I knew a guy that was in California, and he had an emergency operation in California. His medical bills were over $80,000. So he just came back to Canada and just didn't refuse to pay them. He paid them what OHAP would have paid them, something like that. But he didn't have the money to pay that, and they couldn't chase him all the way up here. So,
yeah.
So that's something that people should actually really, really look into. Everything is cheaper down there. You can get a piece of property, you can get a house, a condo, you can get all kinds of things a lot cheaper down there. But when it comes to things like medical, those are the things you really have to be worried about. Medical insurance is not what it seems down there.
Well, I was going to say also the other thing about this is that another thing that I think is driving this, when I came to Canada in 2006, it was publicly recognized around the world that of the major 1 million plus cities in the world, around the world, that Toronto was one of the cheapest to live in, one of the 5 or 6 cheapest to live in of the million population cities. And now it is no longer that. It's one of the most expensive cities to live in the world.
Yeah, we have to thank our wonderful government for this too. I'm not complaining about immigration, but the amount of immigration, I don't think our country can handle it. Our housing prices are skyrocketing because we have too many people, not enough houses.
Yeah.
Our medical system
when housing prices
because there's too much demand on it.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Okay.
So there you have it.
Yeah.
Our demographic analysis of the world has concluded for today. Now I brought up those articles because we had what?
Angela says, I won't even go to the US anymore. Hear horror stories of even people simply traveling there getting sick. And the reason taxes are lower is that they have very little social safety net.
Yeah, they have lower safety nets, but that hasn't dissuaded people with money from going there. that's the problem. If you've got money, you can buy good medical insurance. That's where you go. I got a friend. I got a couple of friends in the States. They got no worries. Their medical insurance is fine. It's they have very good medical insurance if you can afford it. If you can afford it, buy the right kind. You're okay. You're gonna be okay. The problem in the States for a long time was medical insurance that had little little small print. If you didn't read it, there was all kinds of conditions that were a part. Mike Cushman says your safety net in the USA is your gun. Darn right. I need an AR. I need a Glock, an AR-15, a couple of bazookas. Angela says U.S. good money means in the MID.
She didn't say.
Okay. Yeah. But anyways, but that's what we were talking about here is the movements of people for different reasons. We began with the asylum seekers, the refugees that got as far as Garcia Diego, who were headed to Canada. How the heck they ever thought they were going to get to Canada? But they got to Garcia in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and then got routed into Rwanda, and that kind of thing happening because of and this, of course, is Britain's solution for the massive amounts of migrants that are trying to get into Europe and Britain. And then we found that there is other demographic movements, a huge shift of people from certain areas, prosperous parts of the world to more prosperous parts of the world, right here in North America, basically.
Yeah.
So you get a prosperous Californian, and he'll move to Texas because of the tax and other things. So Colorado too, I think, something like that. Yeah,
okay, let's move on. All right. Possible genocide in Sudan. Basically, the West Darfur city of El Janina, one of the worst atrocities in the year-long Sudanese civil war, has been the site of that. According to Human Rights Watch, it says ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity have been committed against ethnic Masalit and non-Arab communities in the city by paramilitary rapid support forces and their Arab allies.
I don't know why they say possible genocide. This is a genocide that's been going on for many, many years. The Arab this is not a religious conflict. Everybody here is a Sunni Muslim, whether it's the Arabs or the Masalit non-Arab communities. They're all religious. They all have the same religion.
Yeah.
The problem here is an ethnic problem, and Darfur has been attacked, and because they're a non-Arab Muslim group by Arab Muslim groups, and it's very hard to distinguish because the Arab Muslim group is blended with the Africans. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference sometimes between a Masalit and an Arab who claims to be an Arab because of because there's been lots of blending. So if you, as an observer, were looking, you wouldn't be able to tell who would be the Masalit and who would be the Arab. But in Darfur, they know the difference, and the Arab populations have been fighting the Darfur people for a very long time in Sudan. And it is a genocide. I would say, I don't know, the reluctance to call this a genocide, possible genocide, when this has been going on for 20 years, maybe more.
Yeah.
And and it's an on and off thing. I'll give it that. I mean, it's not a continuous thing. They go in and they slaughter a bunch of people and then they leave. What has happened here in Jenin is very much like what's happening in Gaza right now. Every day there's like 50 people, 20 people, 100 people dead, and this kind of it's happening because the the RSF, what is it? The Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, is a Sudanese Arab based group. Will go in and they'll fight and take over these places. There has been, to tell you, I think it was the BBC acquired pictures of Jenin, and it shows you the before and after, and how the RSF has burned the city and just kind of destroyed it from the outside in. It's terrible. This is the forgotten area of the world, and unfortunately, I bring this up. I bring international stuff to this show a lot because we have egocentric eyes, and if we don't look outside our own little wonderful bubble, we won't know what's going on in the world. And we don't need to be surprised by these kind of things. We are in a situation where we do have influence in the West, and maybe we could come and help stop those massacres. I used to think so until Gaza happened, and the West is letting that happen every day, without much. They just say bad, but they don't do anything about it. So I don't know how much they'll be able to do in Sudan, but I brought that up. There are people suffering terribly in Sudan. It is forgotten. So I just didn't want it to be forgotten.
Yeah. Well, and actually, the question is, this has the danger of being forgotten, and almost nothing is said about it at the end of the day.
What complicates this is Sudan. This was happening in Darfur before Sudan split into two different countries. Sudan split into two different countries, Sudan and South Sudan, and those wars have been happening. You have a couple of dictators basically trying to control areas, and it's almost like a person-to-person feud. They carry the whole country in with them. I mean, it's very, very, so it gets a little complicated. But right now you have a disastrous genocide, and I don't know why they say possible genocide, because it's been a genocide ever since the Janjaweed started to attack the Darfur. The Janjaweed have been attacking Darfur all along, and they were a militia force of Arabs, and now it happens to be connected with the government, so they call them rapid support forces, but it's the same thing as the Janjaweed.
Yeah. And the worst of this is that well, I guess that these are different tribal groups, aren't they? As well.
Well, it's not tribal. Like there are different peoples, different populations of people. So you have the Arab, who they call the Arabs, and I'll point this out some more. Those people who claim to be Arab, Sudanese, we wouldn't be able to distinguish them from other Africans, basically.
Yeah.
But they have a stronger Arab culture. And they have an admixture of Arab genetics in them. In the Darfur area, not so much, but they are Muslims. They are Sunni Muslims, but they are a different ethnic group, and that's the problem.
And the point is that we don't actually, visually, there's nothing different between them, the groups.
Well, there's a large cultural difference.
Culturally, maybe.
But it's never been very clear to me why the so-called Arab Sudanese are always seems to be aggressive towards the Darfurians, and it's not as if Darfur is a area of the world that is attractive. I mean, it's a desert area. It's an arid area in western part of Sudan. It is not exactly what you call a desirable area of the world. And what I don't know why the Arab Sudanese are attacking Darfur so much over all this time. I just don't understand it. There is a definite distaste or for the Darfurians, those people that live in Darfur from the Arabs, and that's where the Janjaweed come in. It's almost like, geez, it's I don't know, it's like I don't know, almost like the KKK raiding black people in the States. It's like black on black almost. It's very, very difficult for us to understand the motivations there. But what's happening is a rather poor people are being victimized in an area, and we here, I don't know how much effect we could have. I used to think we could have more effect on things like that but then when Ukraine and Gaza happened, I could see we can't do anything. But in any case, it should be learned about, and that's my point of putting it here. There's been atrocities in Jenin, in Darfur again, and I just wanted to make sure that we don't forget there's a rest of the world out there.
There is the rest of the world. Okay, Tom. While we're talking about this, one of the things, of course, that's been going around with a lot of these conflicts is disinformation. And Elon Musk has claimed that the global disinformation index should be shut down, right? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts on this is very interesting. Like there's a show on TV, and I come across it by accident. I've seen it before though, but I haven't seen it lately. It is called Unheard, UNHERD.
Yeah,
and
Unheard.
It is Unheard. And what it is it's kind of a news type of show that sort of, well, its main claim is that anywhere where there is this herd mentality, they're going to go and try to pick it apart, like kind of cut into the every aspect of a story to see what it's like. Unfortunately, there's an outfit called GDI, Global Disinformation, and
Global Disinformation Index, right?
Index, yes. And it's a British thing, but it's also financed from the U.S. Unfortunately, now the global index here, a disinformation index, started out well enough. What it was supposed to do, it was an agency that would pick up on all sort of journalistic output, basically like Fox or CNN or any other kind of. There's tons and tons of smaller ones now, newspapers, every kind of media, and then it would judge it whether or not this media outlet would be giving disinformation. If it judged it was a disinformation, like it'd be somebody like Alex Jones, then it would advise anyone who might want to advertise on that media that it is not a good place to go because it's full of disinformation. However, what has been found out, and as I've said about NPR a couple of weeks ago.
Well, some point, the thing is that even if a site has got disinformation on it, if it's got 1 million viewers, hey, wouldn't you advertise on there if you were a typical advertiser?
Well, no, because you do not want to be associated with disinformation. So it's kind of like an insurance policy. So they will judge your media outlet, your news outlet, and advise advertisers that you are a disinformation or not. So they'll give you a grade. And advertisers do not want to be associated with disinformation, because once they are associated with disinformation, things can go south on them. So they want to be very safe on who they advertise with. The problem here is the people who run the disinformation thing are progressives. Unfortunately, what's happened is it has become a left censoring group. Now, this media outlet called The Herd, Unheard, it's called, is usually biased center to right, center to right, and it will have people come on and talk about different issues from their point of view. The reason why Unheard got a bad stamp as a disinformation group is because it interviews people like Kathleen Stock. Kathleen Stock is a feminist, an anti-trans, well, not exactly anti-trans, but resistant to trans. Basically, she's a feminist, she's a lesbian, but she feels that the trans community is interfering with feminine values or whatever. So she has her opinion on that. That is registered as disinformation because the people who are running the disinformation index are people with progressive views. It's almost like a religion. It's now because they see it in their view. So when something comes up, Kathleen Stock, a lesbian feminist who has problems with the trans community or what's happening in the trans community, that lights them up. Aha, a bigot, disinformation. No, they don't let us decide that. So they have decided that doesn't fit.
That actually is the problem with any such organization like that, is that your disinformation is perfectly, what you claim as disinformation, I claim as perfectly valid information.
Yes, and to be Unheard has taken this right to the British Parliament. It is said that what should be a valuable thing. As a matter of fact, in this particular case, Elon Musk has gone on with Unheard to say that the GDI has overstepped its bounds and needs to be either eliminated or reset. And this is partly due because Unheard's gone to the Parliament of the UK to show that, and I will mention this too, that Elon Musk valued GDI when it first started, because everybody wants to have a place where it's easily filtered. False news or disinformation can be filtered out of something. It's nice to have something like that before you have to wade through all the junk to get to anything valuable. The problem here, of course, though, is that in fact, I'll also say here, it says the U.S. State Department gives it money too. It claims to provide an independent, neutral, and transparent data intelligence, and seeking a challenge for disinformation. Unfortunately, it has become, and this is what Unheard. If you've ever seen Unheard, there's nothing wrong with Unheard. Unheard is a pretty good news or media. It's a little right of center, but that's good because I mostly do left of center. I need that balance. Unheard, it was targeted by the GEDI, which said that a place on its dynamic exclusive list of publications was merited due to anti-LGBTQ plus narratives and being anti-trans equated widely held views on gender disinformation. That's not true, because part of the reason why they got that stamp of disapproval was because Kathleen Stock, an unheard columnist, highly commented on the last night's press awards. Now, she was commended on the press awards. Now, get that. Was labeled a prominent gender critical feminist by the GDI. Well, yeah, she's a lesbian and she doesn't like what's happening in her community. I've heard Kathleen Stock. I've listened to her. She is a very reasonable woman, whether you agree with her or not. She's very reasonable. She has some very good points. I mean, she's a gay woman in that community for a very long time, and she doesn't like the way in which it's going. And so they exclude Unheard because they have this woman as one of the columnists. It really shows you that that there is this unfortunate
Well, okay, so
aggressive element in media these days that has to be themselves filtered. They have to hit their own reset button, basically.
well, yeah, but you see, if you go look at what supposedly, okay, smack down the middle, what's in the center, what's to the left, what's to the extreme left, what's to the right, and what's to the extreme right, if you like. And for example, supposedly on the extreme left was the Atlantic. But yet we saw Atlantic being criticized over its stance on Israel last week. Huffington Post.
Yeah, the justification of killing children, that was good.
Yeah, a Huffington Post on the extreme left. And on the extreme right, you've got the American Conservative, the American Spectator, and Fox News, obviously. In the middle, you've got, Forbes, BBC News. I'm not sure I'd agree with that, but Reuters and Newsweek.
Another little bit of disappointment. I'll add this, that Brianna Joy Gray, who was a journalist on a show called The Rising. It was part of the Hill Media Group.
Yeah,
they have a show called The Rising. There was a woman by the name of Brianna Gray, Joy Gray, Brianna Joy Gray. And she was on this show with a fellow by the name of Robbie Soule. He was supposed to be the right conservative voice, and she was supposed to be the liberal voice on this show. So they were both together, and they would debate a bit, and they would get in each other's face. Most of the time, they would cooperate. She got dumped. She got dumped because of her pro-Palestinian stance. And I can tell you, I listened to that young woman. Well, she's 38 years old, I think, but she looks very young on TV. And quite a pretty girl too. Anyway, she's an excellent, superb journalist, and he wasn't too bad either. But they dumped her because of her pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian stance. But she knew it was coming because the Hill has dumped other pro-Palestinian. What they call pro-Palestinian, but I don't really see her as a pro-Palestinian. I saw her more as a pro-truth, and him too. Basically, he had his right-wing stances, but he could no longer support Israel basically the way he had. But she got dumped, and I thought that was a terrible, terrible injustice. It was a great show. She was a very, very good commentator. I thought really cut it down quick. So I would just like to lament that the Hill has done that in their show, The Rising, which was very good, and they cut her out, sadly.
Mm.
But she knew it was coming, she said, because they can only hold on so long before they have to cut them. The pressure is too hard on the media groups by, I imagine, the Israeli lobby.
Well, and that's actually something. So when you look at these organizations that we were talking about, and whether they were left of center, or right of center, issues like Israeli lobby seem to cut across all of that.
Yeah, they have a whole lot of power going on. Of course, we heard about a Republican who beat the AIPAC assault on him. They put $300,000 up against him, and he won, which is kind of unheard of. And I was listening to a black politician the other day, and he was being assaulted too by AIPAC. He's fighting AIPAC right now, the Israeli lobby, in his re-elections. But another black politician who had too many. He felt that he wouldn't be able to beat AIPAC, so he's going to go along with them. He felt it's better to get in rather than not. So there's what's happening there. So I have a feeling that there's been a lot of power, a lot of pressure on him. I guess she was talking to an interviewer. She was interviewing a sister of an Israeli hostage, and she rolled her eyes at one of the things that the Israeli hostage sister said. But it kind of worked into the context of the whole interview. But just that section looked like it was cold. So that maybe was the straw that broke the camel's back. I have a feeling they wanted to get rid of her anyway because she's making too much sense.
All right. I think we're going to have to leave it at that point.
Okay, everyone. Thanks for listening to our international series today and the demographics that we're talking about. I like to bring that up every once in a while because we really are an island here in North America, and it's good to keep things going. Okay, Kathleen, this one says, Kathleen Stock is wrong to assume that it's not hate speech to say males can't be women. Yeah, I've heard Kathleen Stock talk before, and other feminists. There's a prominent American one that has found I don't consider human rights to be a right or left wing thing. Yeah, me either. But it seems to be sitting like that, like it's my human rights are better than your human rights, kind of thing. And anyhow, that GDI thing has to hit a reset button because it's too influenced by politics right now. Anyway, without further ado, I bid you adieu. Pray for peace, everyone, in Gaza, Ukraine, and Darfur.
Yeah, that list is growing, and it'll probably be a longer one next week.